I failed every church plant assessment. They all said no. They were like, no,
it's not going to work.
It's not going to work. So you got to do something else. I did not wake up thinking I want to be a church planter, or I hate my pastor. I could do this better. I love the church I was a part of. I really was looking to be a teaching pastor. I wanted to be a teaching pastor, but nobody would hire me. I thought about changing my name. I was like, maybe it's my name on the application. Maybe my name should be Nick. That would be something. But Nirup just doesn't sound like, I bet he's from Durant.
Yeah.
And again, that wasn't strategic as much as people are longing for a place of belonging, longing for a place where they could just connect with others, sit down, have a meal, especially in a city that's so transient. And so we just said, party every Wednesday. And it wasn't a bait and switch. It was just, come, tell me your story. Who are you? What are you about? And so our church grew primarily because of hospitality. I would give gift cards to people in our church and say, hey, throw a party. Just throw a party.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Jacob Sheriff Podcast. We are really excited to continue season 6 today with a guest from Denver, Colorado, Nirup Alphonse.
Thanks for having me.
We're so glad that you're here. Tell us a little bit about your church, where you're from, and what you do.
Okay, we'll go fast because I can go long. So we'll go fast because I heard this is only a 4-hour episode.
Yeah,
so
only 4.5, 5 hours. What do we do?
Planted this church 9 years ago. We had a ton of people move out to Denver, Colorado, which is not a hard sell in many ways. Hey, come out to Denver. I will say, when people are impressed that 40 people moved out, I'm like, well, 300 said no, right? But 45 came out and we planted this church and started in a coffee shop. And we can talk more about it later. It had no real strategy. It was, let's meet, let's pray, let's worship, let's preach the word, let's care for the poor, let's just love people well. Yeah. And we did a ton of hospitality and dinners. That's really our only strategy was throw a party every Wednesday.
Well, that's literally the way to do it.
Literally was, let's throw a party every Wednesday. And we did that. And so the church grew, and we kind of just, as the church grew, we needed more space. And so, hey, we were in a coffee shop, and then eventually made it to a high school. And then from a high school, we got a building in 2020. And so it's been growing since then. But it's been a great church. It's really a ton of young people. So average age is probably 25 to 27, but hungry for the Lord, really passionate. And now we're getting older folks because they're kind of figuring out, what is this cult my children are going to on Sundays? Like, they're waking up early, they're going to church, they're staying there all day. What is this? I got to go check it out. I got to test the Kool-Aid, make sure everything's okay. So now they're showing up, but really hungry for the Lord, really passionate, very multi-ethnic. Now, I prefer the term, we can talk about it if you want. I prefer the term inter-ethnic, not multi-ethnic, but very inter-ethnic, great worship expression, prayer culture, love the word, which honestly I felt just being here at Victory Life, such a similar heartbeat. So it's been a great season. Young staff, killer staff, hungry, running hard, learning how to live in a fast-paced environment, but also how to have a true relationship with the Lord. And really the vision of our church is to see people, very similar to you, to see people made alive in Christ. And what does that mean to actually live alive with the Lord now? And so we break that down into the made alive life is living in communion with God, in community with God's people, and committed to the cause of Christ in the world. And so we're really just trying to see that in Denver happen, and the Lord's hand. I can honestly just say the Lord's hand has been on it. I could not say, men, do these 5 strategies and this will be the result. It has purely been God's hand over this church in spite of us. Yeah. So great season in Denver.
That's awesome. Even you saying that, I think, is really encouraging, because it's very tempting, even in church podcast land, to just look for the next strategy. Like, what is the next trend? What is the next thing everybody's doing? But there's something just refreshing and simple about just, hey, we're just going to listen to the Lord and we're going to do what he tells us to do. And just following in that process, what are the things that you've kind of identified as core parts of your culture that you guys have developed?
So let me back up for one second. I can't say that our strategy was to have no strategy because I'm that honorable. I failed every church plant assessment.
Okay.
So all the people that would give me strategy that I wanted, they all said no. They were like, no,
it's not going to work.
It's not going to work. So you got to do something else. So church planting for us was really out of desperation. It wasn't, I did not wake up thinking, I want to be a church planter, or I hate my pastor, I could do this better. I loved the church I was a part of. We loved our time there. We felt the Lord was leading us I really was looking to be a teaching pastor. I wanted to be a teaching pastor, but nobody would hire me. I thought about changing my name. I was like, maybe it's my name on the application. Maybe my name should be Nick. That would be something. But Nirup just doesn't sound like, I bet he's from Durant. Yeah. So I just wanted to teach. And when that didn't happen, we began the process of church planting, went to these assessments, and I just didn't know what I was doing. And so they would ask these questions, and I would say, well, I wouldn't do that. I think that doesn't work. And so I was kind of pushing against the grain of, I don't think that works anymore. I think we should do something different. So that obviously doesn't work for some people. And so we failed all these assessments. So all that to say is let's not have a strategy. Wasn't this, I spent time with the Lord and the Lord came down with this word and said, have no strategy. It was, I don't know what I'm doing. So we're just going to do the things we know how to do, which is we're going to preach the word. We're going to, which by the way, I've been trying to get our team to delete the first 8 years of sermons because they are awful. Like, can we get these off the internet? I do not want to end up on a podcast in 50 years. Get them off the internet. So the sermons were not that good. So I'm so grateful for all the people who were there. You ever have that moment when you started preaching and then you're wondering, like, why are they still here?
Yes.
And it's only because they love you.
Oh, yeah.
Your preaching is horrible.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's so bad. But they're like, we love this guy. We love this kid.
I get this compliment. People mean it as a compliment, and I do my very best to take it as a compliment. So I'm guessing you may have gotten this compliment. I love your preaching. I'm learning so much. You have come so far. When I first was listening to you, you were really difficult and just like drawing this huge contrast. Yeah. And I just thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's basically them saying like, you suck. And
that's what it feels like.
And now you're tolerable. It's basically what they're saying. Yeah. But I will say though, the culture of Durant, Oklahoma is way different than Denver.
I would guess.
In Denver, if you do well, like probably most major metropolitan cities, if you do well, nobody tells you. You know you did well because nobody complained. Like, oh, that was good. Nobody said anything. Yeah. Nobody walked out. No one was cussing at me during, which has happened to me. But here, when I got done preaching, I mean, every person is coming up to shake my hand. Can I give you a hug? I'm like, man, they're different over here.
Some Southern hospitality.
I didn't know. I'm not ingrained in the culture enough to know if that was we genuinely liked it or it was a pity hug. I'm not 100% sure which way it went.
I would say it's probably 2/3, 1/3. 2/3 totally 100% genuine. A third like we want you to feel good.
We could tell your self-esteem is low. Let me give you a hug. Might make you feel better. So all that to say is I just wanted to preach the Bible. Yeah. And then pray. And prayer was something that we've grown into. I can't even say it was an early conviction to pray. It was just sort of, the Lord says we're supposed to do this. So how do you do this? Let's pray together. And so prayer, worship, caring for the poor. I would say the one thing we did, and I can tell you stories about this, but there was a single mom that came to our church the second Sunday. She was a refugee from Sierra Leone, 3 kids, no resources. And she came to our church and needed help. And I remember calling a friend of mine and saying, why would God send her here? There's churches up the street that probably have, their coffee budget is probably more than our yearly budget. And I'll never forget it. My friend said, older, wiser guy said, if you care for the people nobody wants, God will give you the people everybody wants. And so we just started caring for this family, paying their rent. And she is, I mean, 100-fold of what that family has poured back into our church. I mean, there is not a financial comparison to what that family means to us in the church and her leadership and her children's leadership. So we care for the poor, care for our city, and then we just wanted to do hospitality. And again, that wasn't strategic as much as we started to see that the culture of Denver, and I think it's true of anywhere, people are longing for a place of belonging, longing for a place where they could just connect with others, sit down, have a meal, especially in a city that's so transient. And so we just said, party every Wednesday. And it wasn't a bait and switch. It wasn't show up to dinner, get some tacos, and then I'm going to lead you to the Lord. It was just come, tell me your story. Who are you? What are you about? And so our church grew primarily because of hospitality. And then I didn't have a staff early on, but I would give gift cards to people in our church and say, hey, throw a party. Just throw a party. I even did a whole series on throwing parties. Just throw a party and how Jesus was always at a party. And I would say, listen, if you don't get invited to parties, you're probably not fun. Jesus got invited to parties because he was fun.
Yeah.
Yes, he was serious, but you don't get invited to parties if you're not a fun person. So I think he got invited because he was a fun person. So throw parties, invite people to parties, and our church grew because of that. As you grow, like anything, trying to figure out either how to scale a ministry or to how to ingrain a culture is a decision you have to make. And so we're kind of living in that tension right now. Right. Do you continue to use this as a ministry, or is it, no, this has to be ingrained in the culture of who we are. And those are two very different approaches. One is mechanical or can be mechanical and measurable, while the other is just purely anecdotal. And it has to be felt. And so we're trying to move in the direction of prayer has to be the culture. Hospitality has to be the culture. Worship has to be the culture. Preaching has to be the culture. Caring for the poor has to be the culture. It can't just be these ministries that we do. So we're trying to figure out and live in the tension of what that looks like.
And when you sort of land on those things, those cultural identifiers, that it's like, this is who we are, that the clearer that becomes, the more likely that's going to be sustained over generations. As you continue to kind of develop that, that's something that, we're in a ministry that's on its sort of second leg, that second generation. And the tension we feel as leaders now is there's so much good that was established that we want to maintain. But then if we just get stuck in this maintenance mode of just maintaining what was, like we're not paying attention to actively to what is the Lord saying and doing right now. And so living in that tension between the past, the present, and then where things are going, those cultural sort of like anchors are so vital to identify and make clear.
Yeah, I think that's where there's a difference. And you probably feel this. There's a real difference between the ministry of the church and the program of the church. And the programs can ebb and flow, shift and change with time, with context. But the ministry of the church, why we exist, and what we do, well, that's timeless. And for me, I just want to let the scriptures define that. What do the scriptures say? I think that the future of the church has to be getting tethered back to the church of the first 3 centuries. And how did they live? And one of the biggest challenges is the autonomous life that we experience now versus the communal life of the church in the first 3 centuries. So trying to figure out how do you make that tension. But I think Paul in Romans 12 really lays out the case for what are the primary 5 ministries of the church. And you wish Paul would give you the exact step 1, step 2, step 3, just do this. You almost wish Jesus would give you that. Think of a Sunday morning. Well, Jesus, what exactly do you want us to do in the ecclesia? He just says, I want you to gather, and what the gathering means and what the ecclesia means. And so we're left with figuring out and being creative and thinking and asking the Lord and praying. And it's also the beauty of God's design. Where I'm not going to give you the robotic do these things. But Paul in Romans 12 lays out what I would contend are the ministries of the church and the Christian life. And in Romans 12, verse 9 through 10, he talks about love one another, abhor what is evil. But who is he talking about when he says one another? Which, by the way, that reference occurs several times in the New Testament, and it always is talking about the church, one another. So Paul is saying, hey, love one another. Well, what does that look like? And then he talks about honoring one another, which I would count as the ministry of presence. I think in 2024, the way that you honor someone is with your undivided presence. And this is how the gospel begins. Jesus brings the presence of God into humanity. So honor, then Paul talks about service, prayer, generosity, and hospitality. And this is between Romans 12, 9 through 13. So I would say those are the ministries of the church. And so then as you're navigating in the situation you guys are in, okay, these are the ministries we have. How did that look 20 years ago and 30 years ago? And how does that look now? The ministries aren't changing, but the way in which those are delivered or experienced or expressed, those have to change. And culturally, I would contend that Americans are moving beyond the programmatic experience of church. And you've got to figure out things between digital and analog and hybrid, getting any one of us to show up 10 weeks in a row for anything, just improbable.
Yeah.
Like, I work here. I can't even make it 10 Mondays in a row. So we've got to figure out other mechanisms to be able to instill and develop those ministries. But I think in many ways it's simple. It's top down. It's long, but it's not complicated. So when you were preaching your sermon on Monday night, and he's telling 4 hours of stories, which are incredible. And awesome. I took up my notes and I said in huge letters, tell more stories. Because statistics rarely move people. There's like the one nerd who's like, oh, that statistic really got me.
Jacob may be that nerd.
Rarely move people. But it's stories. And so stories shape culture. And so, which is difficult in American context because we've lost the ability to storytell. And even our approach to the Bible is so linear. It's so cause and effect versus, hey, this is a story. And it's a story about God. It's not even a story about you. It's a story about God. And so I think one of the keys, if there was strategy to creating that culture, is telling more stories. And so I wrote, tell more stories. That was way more. Not that your preaching wasn't amazing, but I remembered more stories than I remembered more of the content you shared. But I was like, oh, I remember that story. I remember that story. So remembering stories, I think, is one of the ways to build culture.
Hey, we're glad you're enjoying the podcast.
Hey, Ben here is the one who mainly edits the podcast, so give it up for Ben. And what else should they do, Ben?
Please like, subscribe, and comment. Definitely comment.
Absolutely. All of these things really help us with the YouTube algorithm. And what it does is it means that the more that you comment, like, and subscribe, the more that we get shown on people's front page of YouTube.
So. And I get to keep my job.
You get to keep your job.
Thanks.
Yeah, back to the episode.
How have you used storytelling to move your team or move your congregation in a particular direction?
So one of the things we do internally is every Monday we have a thing called All Staff Touch Point. And it's a 30-minute, we show up, we pray for about 15 minutes, and then 15 minutes is just running through the week, the season. We do everything in 7-week runs. So it's here's what's happening in the 7-week run. Make sure staff, blah, blah, blah. You have everything to do. And I don't lead them. It's one of our campus pastors that leads them. And then at the end of every one of those, we just call it a leader moment. And the leader moment gets to, he or she gets to decide what to share, what to inspire, what they want in our staff. And it's always a story that they're choosing. It's a story either from the church or their own life or something they read, something that was inspiring to them. And they share that story. And then they move people through that. So that's the way we do it internally. In our staff, we want to celebrate stories and, hey, what did you hear this week? Talk about stories, talk about things that really move us and inspire us. And so we do that internally. And then externally, whether it's social media or email, telling stories about what's happening in the life of the church. What are people experiencing? I think we need to do more. I was inspired by watching Jacob share, story after story after story. I'm like, I think there's more stories. We're just not asking. And we need to know them. So we're trying to do that. And then even something simple, story doesn't have to be this 45-minute ordeal. So we have people who read the scriptures before the message on Sunday. And they'll go up and they'll say, hey, I'm so-and-so. I've been at this church for X number of years. I serve on these teams and just a little bit about their story. And then they read the text. So even that is, you're watching a father of 2 children who goes up and reads the scripture, but he's talking about how he serves in kids ministry and what that means to him and his family. So those are just little stories. Not every story has to be I was driving and the steering wheel came off and Jesus saved me. And most people's stories are just, how has God met you in the daily rhythms of life and the daily boredom of life? And so we're trying to find ways to do that and then tell more compelling stories, whether it's video and digital and moving into that space. So we're experimenting with more of those. I think though, you have to do more live stuff because people are bombarded with digital content.
There's almost a suspicion or skepticism towards it at some point where it's like, man, is this real?
Is it manipulated? Is it edited? Is it polished? And like, I've just been doom scrolling for the last 45 minutes. This one more story is not going to do anything. And so because there's so much digital content in front of people, I think what people are missing is the live element. So, man, that was a great story. But unless you were at church on Sunday, sitting there, you would not have heard that story. So in some ways, you've got to make it, hey, like back in the day when TV was live, if you missed it, you missed it. Either, unless you were lucky enough, your parents got you a VCR and they were okay with you, taping over their Little House on the Prairie episode. If you missed it, you missed it. That was the moment.
Just curious, this isn't a reference you can use with your church, right? They don't know what you're talking about.
25, 27-year-olds VCRs. That doesn't sound.
I don't know that at all. I think I saw a story a few weeks ago where a kid found a tape in his backyard, and he's like, "Dad, I found something from the Civil War."
Sounds about right.
No, but true story about Little House on the Prairie. So people always ask me, like, "Man, you're raised in India. Like, how do you speak so well?" And I was like, "True story. My parents would sit from the time we were born, would make us watch Little House on the Prairie, Gilligan's Island."
Wow.
Brady Bunch, Archie Griffin or whatever that show is called, and I Love Jeannie, like all these shows. So I'm watching all these shows growing up, but I didn't know that they were from the 70s. Like they were so old. I'm watching them in the 80s, 80s and 90s. So I moved to America.
Yeah.
And I didn't know what's cool. I don't know what's popular. I'm like, so you guys watching Little House on the Prairie or what? They're like, no, my grandma is.
I'm sure that made middle school for you wonderful.
Yeah. Like, does grandma want to hang out? Like, I want to see what happened to Laura Ingalls. I mean, what happens? Almanza was pretty upset the last episode.
I was sad when her sister went blind, right?
Yeah, I think she recovered her sight though.
Yeah.
And she took some magic potion from that guy selling serpent oil or something. And then he came back to life.
The crazy thing about that show, not to like diverge too far, but the end of it, they literally just blow up the town. Like
it's weird.
It gets to the end of the show, and basically their contract with the place that they were filming like ran out, and they're like, well, we're not going to leave all this stuff here, and they literally blow up the entire town and leave, and that's the end of the show.
That's my plan for the church too.
Yeah, just kind of
like when I'm done, I guys, I'm blowing it up. Next pastor has to rebuild this thing. Good luck. It's out of here. No, but that's how I grew up, seeing those things. And so coming here and learning a totally different culture of what it navigates. So I think part of that is just the same true of this church, is learning a new culture. How do you adapt? How do you learn? How do you figure out what's working, what's not? And something as funny as references. All my references are like 90s movies, 90s hip hop, 90s R&B. I was like, I need new references. Like they don't know any of this cool stuff from back in the day. So just learning the culture. It's one of my biggest struggles is probably when it comes to preaching, communicating, or just cultural engagement, is I'm more interested in the sociology, the psychology, the anthropology of a culture. I'm less interested in who's the most dynamic entertainer right now.
Right.
I just found out Billie Eilish wasn't a dude. Because someone was asking me, they're like, oh, you probably know about a bunch of cool stuff. I'm like, I don't. I hardly watch TV. I don't watch the news. I pretty much just read psychology, anthropology, sociology, philosophy. And the person was like, so I was like, if somebody walked in, I wouldn't know who they were. And they said, if Billie Eilish walked in, you wouldn't know. And I was like, well, what does he look like? So I don't know if that's a struggle of mine or if I just don't care enough to know about what's happening in the world of entertainment.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Do you ever, how much time do you spend really understanding?
I have a 13-year-old daughter. That's it. Like whatever I references I get, or whatever YouTube reels my son's been watching. So I will say, not being in a metropolitan, we are in more rural communities. Me connecting things to people has to be more on the ground than making cultural references. Young adults, like the young adults in this area, like I'm sure it would humor them, but it's not what's like connecting them to a sense of belonging. So I don't put. I probably should put more, but I've bought in. I'm perfectly comfortable with the nerd that I am, but we have to walk the fine line of keeping people aware politically without giving into the politics.
Right.
That's a little that has a lot more energy and fire in our communities.
Yeah, that is, I think, a challenge just in 2024 how do you as a Christian engage the political process, but not be dependent on the political process or trust the political process. So that's difficult. And especially if you have across the board in our church, there are people who vote in every different category and many of them who believe the same thing, but believe the approach to that thing is two different ways. And so you have to be an equal opportunity. The kingdom is an equal opportunity offender. So I would notice if I talk about one thing, then one whole side will applaud and the other side is upset. And then you talk about another issue and that same side was applauding is now upset. And the people who were upset are now applauding. And then you're just thinking like, well, I guess the kingdom just offends everybody. And how do you live as a faithful person to the kingdom that we're citizens of heaven in a context that's developing rapidly? Part of that, I think, though, is trying to get your church and your people to stop. I mean, I think people will be set free. Like, hey, don't watch the news for a year. Like any news, other than the local news of updating your traffic. Right? Don't watch the news. I think you'd be totally free. And then people would say like, well, how do you know if anything's going to happen? Like if something major happened, you would hear about it. You would hear, but somebody would tell you. So I did a 40-day, I call it a pause. I did a 40-day news pause and I felt so incredibly free. I felt like I had better mental clarity, peaceful, not waking up. Because I would wake up and kind of during the day, I would try to get multiple channels to kind of see vantage points of everything. Like none of this is filling me with any more peace. None of this is making me, like, Lord Jesus, come now. This is amazing. Like this is making me more anxious, making me more upset, making me more frustrated. Like I just have to turn this off. So I did a 40-day pause and it was great. I still haven't gone back yet. So I only know about major news events because someone told me. Like, hey, have you heard this? Have you heard this? And then trying to read up about it briefly. And then, or then you can just get stuck reading 500 articles about the same thing. And it's just not good for your mind.
Last night at our Jubilee conference, you did something really, just from the prompting of the Holy Spirit. You led a moment for our congregation that I just thought was really powerful, where you asked everybody under the age of 30 to come forward, and then you had everybody above the age of 30 who wanted to speak a blessing and to sort of choose in that moment, hey, I'm not going to curse this generation anymore. I'm going to bless. I'm going to lean in and sort of take on that mantle of I'm going to help this generation sort of advance into that next season of discipleship. And would just love your perspective on, especially with having such a younger congregation, what are those core things that you see about this next generation that you feel like the church really needs to pay attention to? And then what gives you hope for this generation that's coming up? I've got a 15-year-old daughter and
it's good.
I'm just excited to hear about that.
I think every generation has thought the generation below them are just the worst.
Right.
I think boomers are saying the same thing about Gen X, and Gen X are like, oh, look at these millennials. And millennials are now like, look at these Gen Zs, and Gen Zs are probably any day now going to talk about Gen Alpha. and nobody steps back and says like, well, who's raising those people? Like I just raised an entire generation and now I'm complaining about them. So I think every generation has the tendency to look down at the generation that's below them. Part of it's probably envy. I would have to admit, like I'm a little envious that when I wrote a paper in high school, you had to go to a library, you had to get a book, you had to go to a chiropractor afterwards because the books were so heavy. And now you could never leave your home with pajamas on and write and discover, research whatever you want, or the ability to travel. When we were younger coming up, I mean, to travel just was an ordeal to go. And now you can go from coast to coast, back and forth. So everything's become easier. And I think that's probably generational, just keeps happening. And so every generation has something that they're probably wrestling with. I do think every generation becomes more entitled. Every generation is more entitled than the generation above it. And that's just true, I think. And so I think in many ways, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are looked at as a very entitled generation. And part of that is true. They are entitled. No more entitled than we were. But the expression is probably a little bit different because the access to things they have is so easy and it's been given to them. So I think one, recognizing, okay, they have a sense of entitlement, but the only thing that can break a spirit of entitlement is a spirit of humility. not a spirit of I told you so.
Yeah.
And so leading them in humility, not because it's the antidote to an entitled life, because it's the way of Jesus. How do you live a humble life? So I think humility is a big deal. But this generation's entitled, but they're also very hungry. They're also searching for truth, searching for meaning, searching for transcendence, and they will fact check you. It's not like back in the day where a preacher could say something, or you could say something, like as a parent, you could say something, and my 13-year-old kid would be like, "Well, Dad, I just actually checked the facts on it, and it's actually 2.2, not 2.4." Well, you're missing the point. The point is, go to your room, So they want to know it's true, but they recognize that they have access to information. So 20 years ago, preaching, the pastor was meant to be the expert on everything. Like you're an expert on agriculture, on science, on politics, on world trade, on sexuality, on gender, on marriage, on parenting, on everything. Well, now everyone's become an expert in something. And there's deep diving into minute thoughts that would have been overarching 20 years ago. So take anxiety. I mean, I do think statistically we do know that this is the most anxious generation, and you can correlate that between the rise of social media and this generation. And so you have this generation that is hungry, that's also entitled, but is desperate for the Lord, that wants truth, that's very anxious, that wants to be known. They're a deeply lonely culture. Vivek Murphy, I think it was in 2022, came out with basically said, this is the loneliest generation ever.
Yeah.
The loneliness on their body is equivalent to smoking. I think he said 10,
I think 15
cigarettes a day.
15 cigarettes a day.
Like they're so incredibly lonely. And so we have to speak into that generation. And so you have a choice. Okay, am I going to rail on this generation, who, by the way, is going to have kids and is going to be running for office and is going to be in charge when you are trying to get your, Social Security check. So don't piss them off, So do you want to rail on that generation, or do you want to say, I have something to offer, I have something to contribute, I want to raise them up because this is what kingdom life looks like. But on the most basic level, I don't want to burn the house down with the people who are going to be running the house in 20, 30 years. And so how do we develop, pour into, invest? And so I think that 30-year-old age is, in my mind, at least the cutoff where you begin to see there's a split here between, I think you can tell a big difference between someone over 30 and how they operate, even vocationally, and someone under 30. And you probably have pockets in there that can ebb and flow. But for the most part, I think you can tell a distinction between tolerance, work ethic, ability to be offended or not offended, anxious, non-anxious, vocational clarity, the way they were raised in family, and then ability to navigate social media and the digital age. So we want to speak to that age. And so I felt a prompting, and I feel this quite a bit, even in our own church, is those under the age of 30 come up and receive a blessing, because you're receiving a curse every day.
Yeah.
Every day you're cursed by yourself, by the enemy, by the culture, by people around you. So come up and receive a blessing. And what are their place in life? What environment can that happen in?
Yeah.
You couldn't, imagine the manager of Costco, like, hey, all my employees under 30, come to the front register. If you're over 30, I want you to, help these guys. The church is the environment where that needs to happen. So to me, something like that, where come up, receive a blessing, is only step one. Step two has to be, if I'm an older, and I put the onus on those over 30. You've got to go find the people under 30 and say, hey, how can I bless you? How can I pour into you? How can you come over? How can I help you with basic stuff like adulting? So many young adults come in my office and like, I'm anxious, I'm this, and this. So I usually do one of two things. The first thing I say, the very first thing, because I'm not a clinical psychologist by any stretch of the imagination, but I say, let me see your phone. And I look at their phone, and the first thing I go to is screen time. I'm like, well, maybe you're clinically depressed. And if you are, I cannot speak to that. You need to go see a counselor. Here's some counselors you can go see. Or your brain is being fried because you're on a phone for 9 hours a day. Yeah. You're on social media. You're on YouTube. You're on whatever other TV shows. It probably means you're not drinking water. You probably haven't seen the sun since, Obama was a senator. You probably don't drink water. You probably don't eat healthy, which means you don't sleep healthy. So maybe you're all those things, or you're just going against the things that God has written into the natural laws of the universe and expecting God to miraculously, through a counseling session, break free of this. Most of what people are experiencing, I think his name is Adam Grant. Adam Grant wrote an article in the New York Times, and he said, the primary emotion that people are feeling is languishing. That's the primary emotion. So if you look at the scale of human flourishing, so you have flourishing on one side, depression on the other side. So the vast majority are actually in the middle, which is languishing. This kind of blah existence. I need to watch Hulu all night. I need to doom scroll all night because I'm not depressed. I'm just bored out of my mind and I'm languishing. So he says that's the primary emotion. And so that's one, like, okay, what are you actually doing with your body, with your time, and the science behind it is amazing. Like drinking water, which is a struggle for me because I only get my water when I drink my coffee. So
that's my default, and I have to. I
think I'm up to a glass of water a day. Yeah, I think I'm like I'm slowly working up. I think you're supposed to have 8 or 10 or I don't know how you could drink. First of all, I don't know how you could drink 8 cups of water a day and have a full-time job. I don't know how you could do that.
Well, Jacob, can you tell us?
Half your body weight in ounces. I drink 90 to 100 ounces of water a day.
Like, how do you work?
I have to pee a lot.
Are you full-time cathleter or what? Like, how do you work?
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So it's that. And then it's what you also notice is they don't know how to see, for all the college kids and young adults that are like, I can't wait for my freedom and I'm going to do what I want to do. They actually don't recognize how much they thrived in the organized environment where you went to class because it was the time to go to class. You knew where the bookstore was. You knew where to get food. And now as an adult, they don't know how to navigate. Oh, my boss doesn't care if I'm not feeling well. My landlord doesn't care. I have to pay the rent and learning how to navigate adulthood. And many parents did not teach their children or have not taught their children how to navigate adulthood. I remember weeks of my parents walking me through a checkbook. This is how you write a check. This is how you pay rent. This is how you do this. I mean, most kids don't know this at all. And part of it is because they've been conditioned not to.
Right.
So, I took my kid, you probably had this with your kids too. I took my kid to first day of school, he's 8th grade or 7th grade. I'm like, all right, you can get a pair of shoes. We're going to get you a nice pair of shoes. So take him to the store to buy his first pair of Jordans. And it wasn't even an expensive one. I mean, it was like, it needs to be on sale. Right. And so we get a pair. It was probably $50. 50, like these AJ ones look really cool. $50 we buy. As we're walking out of the store, I'm telling him, hey, just so you know, this isn't normal. My parents never bought me Jordans or Nikes or Reeboks or Huaraches or anything. We got Payless shoes. We got Payless shoes, and I learned how to go find old Nike emblems and logos, and I would iron or stitch them onto my Payless shoes.
Nice.
And my friends are too stupid to know the difference. So I got Payless, but even then, that's not normal. My parents never got $20 Payless shoes. They were wearing, 50-cent flip-flops. So every generation is getting better than what their parents got. And so we've been conditioned to just, well, this is how it is. I just get good stuff. This is how it is. Someone just pays my rent. Someone just does this. So a lot of what they're feeling is just, oh, this is adulting. And it's kind of like when your 7-year-old says, my shins hurt. Like, well, nothing happened. You're just growing. And there's nothing you can do about it. You're just growing. It's called Growing Pains, and which is a great show, by the way. Like, it's just growing pains. So helping young adults, I do think, and we haven't done this yet, but we're about to. I do think you have to have cohorts. You have to have small pockets of 8 to 12 young adults combined in with a leader and older leaders of teaching them spiritual disciplines, but also adulting disciplines. How do you be an adult in Jesus' name? So I don't think you can do that in big seminars. And I think it's, you have to like, hey, I need to put you in a class. How do you navigate this? How do you navigate? Your boss doesn't like you and he may never, or she may never like you, but that's not the point of why you work. Or there's an entire generation, and we can talk about this for hours. There's an entire generation of Christians who believe that their career and their calling are one and the same. And that's just not true. It's not true. For some of us, it can be. But it's not true for the vast majority. Your career and your calling never changes. Your career can ebb and flow into other things, which is really a gift of privilege, by the way. Most people in in southern Malawi aren't saying like, I wonder what I should do for my career. Like, your dad was a farmer, you're a farmer. That's what you should do. So helping them navigate all that. So like any generation, it requires a lot of time, a lot of work, a lot of patience. And I would say our millennial generation, and I can speak for myself, I feel like I can speak for a lot of my friends in ministry, did not receive a lot of training, a lot of coaching.
Yeah.
It was sort of watch us do it and then God bless you.
Yeah.
We got a lot of God bless you ministry. Like
Absolutely.
and it was like, go get it. You know, go get it, Tiger.
I just had a
great. Just go.
existential moment last night, like sitting, a couple rows back, and you do that call, and I'm like, wow, I'm the old one in the room at this point. Like,
You're the wise one.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
wise.
There you
You've
go. It's
become Yoda.
The gray hair, comes out.
Well, it's the awareness that in that call, like my imagination was our children, so teenagers.
Yep.
And then I open my eyes and I'm seeing married with kids adults. And it's like that realization.
Yeah.
These are kids. Like
Yeah.
I'm not barely out of that generation. I'm way out of that.
Yeah.
And now it's a different level of responsibility to them.
It is. But I mean, think about that, people with kids. I mean, we remember when we first had kids and you're terrified. I mean, I remember when my oldest son was born, every corner was protected. Every light socket was covered. And now our fourth kid is juggling with knives and, playing with fire.
Yeah.
And there is this thing of, I need to help these young fathers and young mothers, my wife helping young mothers. Hey, this is important, but you're going to learn some stuff along the way. And let me help you learn some things and help navigate through some of these things. And the things that we've learned about through science and biology of what happens to families and family dynamics and family trauma, all kinds of stuff, which we never talked about trauma growing up.
Never heard the word.
Never heard the word trauma.
I think I was in college first time I heard that word.
And when I was in college, if someone said they were depressed, I mean, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
Like, oh man, you're depressed. Like that's got to be bad.
Yeah.
It wasn't a thing. Anxiety wasn't a thing. Like
even like the term mental health, I don't remember
was not a
being.
thing.
Yeah.
No. People say like, were you ever anxious as a young adult? I was like, yeah, we called it life.
Yeah.
It was called life. You're brown and you're a young adult. It's called life. So all these things we're learning now of how to help young adults navigate and families navigate this. There is a reality of generational trauma.
Right.
There is a reality of abandonment and betrayal. But a lot of it is also helping them. Like, I think every generation has to learn how to have fortitude in some area. And so this next generation, I think, is fortitude in vocation, fortitude in work ethic, fortitude in emotional. Like, how do you be tough?
Yeah.
Be tough, have a soft heart, but tough skin, and learning how to have some fortitude, some grit, some tenacity, and keep moving forward. And that's a thing that the generation above us had, right? This, I just had something really tragic happen, and it's a really traumatic time, and it's really broken, but I got to go to work. If I don't do this, there is no food on the table. And so they had a lot of fortitude in one area, and on the back end, we're not really letting the emotions of their heart.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think in my entire life, my parents have never asked me, how do you feel? Not one. I've never, like, how do you feel? Like, they've never asked me that before. So I've had to learn, like, emotions are not a sign of weakness.
Yeah.
I need to press into my emotions, but I cannot let my emotions dictate where I'm going or what I need to do. Like, okay, I'm feeling sad, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling worried, I'm feeling afraid, but I have to keep moving forward. I cannot stay in this. And that's been I cannot talk to my parents about that. I call my dad sometimes just for fun. And I call him quite a bit. And I'm like, hey dad, how's it going? He's like, yes, what do you want? I was like, I just want to talk to you. He's like, okay, what do you want to talk about? And I was like, how's your day? How you feel? I feel good. Okay, that's it. Okay, bye. Like, okay, goodbye. So this generation just is different.
Yeah.
And you're not going to try to convince the generation above you to get this generation to be exactly like you. Where are they? What I love about the message of Jesus is he meets you where you are, not where he thinks you should be or where you should be. But I'm going to meet you where you are.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to leave you there. And that's basic discipleship. Basic discipleship is the ministry of presence, to meet people where they are and not demand that they meet you somewhere else. And so I think that people under 30 are hungry for that. I tell older folks in my church all the time. I say, walk up to in the foyer, which, you know, Tozer says the easiest place to make disciples is in the church. They're already there. Walk up to them. I say, walk up to them and just say, hey, you look really stupid. Can I take you out to coffee? And I guarantee they will say yes. Yeah. I guarantee it. They'll say yes. But if you're waiting for a under 30 to find you, it's rare. It's very rare. So older people going and finding the young, and you know, you see this right now is in sports. You see a ton of former NBA, NFL guys pouring into younger guys. Yeah. Not just in the sports, but helping them navigate faith and family and finances. Like, hey, let's help you because we made a ton of mistakes along the way. Yeah. So how do we help you? So the church has to catch up to this a lot. I think it's happening in pockets. It's definitely happening, but we should certainly put some fuel on it. Yeah. And help it.
I think that's actually a beautiful clarity of purpose for an older generation to recognize the opportunity, especially if this generation is willing to listen. Like maybe there's this communication gap and we just don't know how to speak each other's language. But if we can help bridge that just with that simple instruction, find a young person and go and tell them, hey, you look stupid. I want to help you.
You look dumb. There's a communication gap. I think there's also a space and pace gap. Yeah. Where every generation is running at a different pace. And so if you're older, you just can't say like, yeah, you got to meet me at my house at 2:30. Like that's probably not going to work. You probably have to meet at 8 p.m. or 6 a.m. You're just not like, they're in a different space and season of life. And you have to remember that. Yeah. You have to remember, like, if a person calls me and says, hey, do you want to hang out every Tuesday at 4:00? No, I can't do every Tuesday. I have 4 kids. And on a given Tuesday, life just looks different. But I would love to spend time with you. Can we figure out the best time to make this happen? Yeah. And so you guys learn that it can't be your way, the highway. Yeah. You've got to be able to meet them where they are.
So ingraining this in a culture of hospitality, what I hear leading your church is you're both instructing an older generation to take ownership, but my assumption is that then you would start telling stories of when that kind of action had a dramatic Jesus-oriented transformational experience for a younger generation. Oh, yeah. That's how you would integrate that into
especially in stories. Yeah. Especially in stories. Because so many young adults in a city like Denver, where they're transient, most of them are not from there. And people born and raised in Denver, I mean, they are proud of it. Yeah. They're more proud than Texans. I mean, they are proud.
That's bold.
Like they have the native sticker on there. And you have to be, if you were born in Utah and moved to Denver on day one, like, no, you're not a native. Yeah. Like, you're not. You have to be like born, they are so proud of it. So other than that, I mean, everyone's transient. So think about the nature of life, the nature of transience. When's the last time someone has sat down and had a meal on the table, sitting on the table? So much of hospitality it's become an industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. But at the very heart of it, it's sitting at a table. So putting food on the table. You have no reason to get up. The food's on the table, the drink's on the table, the charcuterie's on the table, everything's on the table. So sit at the table. And the table becomes a place of stories. Yeah. And so one thing that we do that's a really simple practice for our hospitality nights and training people in hospitality is sit down, invite people. And so we tell people, invite people and ask the Holy Spirit to challenge you. Is everyone coming the same age, the same background, the same ethnicity? Do we all vote the same? Do we all talk the same? Are we just going to get together and rally against these people? Or so inviting people that we all have different, and ask the Holy Spirit to lead you in that. Most of us, this isn't a racial thing. This isn't a white issue or black. Most human beings are more comfortable with people who look like them. You just are. Like if I took you to India and you're surrounded by 1.2 billion brown people and you see one white face, you would navigate to them. And it doesn't make you racist. It just makes you human. You're going to go to people who look more like you. Yeah. And so we tend to do that. We tend to just surround ourselves with people who look like us, who vote like us, and who act like us. And so how do I surround myself at a table with people who are different than me? And then all we do, it's a really simple practice. We light a couple candles. We say a prayer. One person says, the light of Christ has come. And then everyone repeats, and the darkness shall not overcome it. And that's sort of the dinner is set, meal is beginning. Yeah. And then everyone gets 2 minutes. One person's sort of the bearer of the clock, if you will. Everyone gets 2 minutes to just share their story and whatever story you want to share in 2 minutes. Now, no one ever stays under 2 minutes. Everyone goes over and everyone's like trying to rush the last second details and, and by the way, I got married.
Yep.
You know, and their poor spouse is like sitting next to them.
Yeah. Like, we'll talk about that later.
You didn't mention Jesus or your kids. But we do that. And what's really beautiful is the way that people share when's the last time you've been in an environment where you have 2 minutes of people's undivided attention just to share your story? And so that's really special. It's really powerful. And then you start to see connections like, oh man, you're a military kid. I'm a military kid. Like, you know that? And so you see these connections starting to happen and you see friendships starting to build in that. So we're trying to create the space for those conversations. So that's like basic level, easy hospitality, set the food at the table. Part of the training for hospitality is letting people know, honestly, hospitality costs you something. You should put in your budget. You know, when my wife and I first started in hospitality, it was all spaghetti. It was like spaghetti and romaine lettuce. That's all we could afford. I think we could probably feed like 20 people for $5.
Right. That's the way to do it.
Yep.
What's the cheapest beef we could buy? What's the cheapest pasta sauce? And so it's just like, hey, it costs you. So hospitality has to cost you. Yeah. And that's basic hospitality. And then, of course, the church was known for radical hospitality, not just meals. You know, Diana Butler Bass writes in her book, The People's History of Christianity, and Rodney Stark would also verify this in his book, The Rise of Christianity, that in the first 3 centuries, Christianity really explodes, not because of martyrdom, but because of hospitality. On the most radical level of receiving children who were left to die in the streets, receiving orphans and widows to care for the poor, care for the elderly, the sick. I mean, hospice comes out of hospitality. Hospital comes out of hospitality, but also just basic hospitality of opening your home for dinner and people coming over and people living with you and people staying with you and just living that kind of life. So that's how the church exploded. Even during pandemics, it's the church that's bringing in the sick and bringing in the hurting. And so we should be known as a people who are just radically hospitable. And it can't just be, it's a Southern culture thing. It's an industry. It is the way of Jesus to be hospitable.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears a little bit as we kind of start turning this, towards a conclusion. So one of the recurring themes on this podcast is spiritual disciplines, habits, core things that we can integrate into our lives to kind of help us on the path of discipleship. And so I just am curious, what is your kind of personal discipline look like as far as like how you structure your day, how you structure your week, and what has been how have you kind of crafted that over time, and how's it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I love discipline in and of itself. I think for me, just overarching, the discipline can become the thing more than Jesus can become the thing, because I'm in my ordinary life. If I was not a believer, I would still be very disciplined. So I have to just make sure I don't think that's something else. That's just my innate personality. I was sort of born with it, just being disciplined, methodical, routine. I don't like the word practice, and I'm not against it. Dallas Willard uses it. So far be it from me to tell Dallas he's wrong. I don't like the word practice because I grew up playing sports. You grew up playing sports. Practice you practice because it wasn't a game.
Right.
And then you went to the game and you hope what worked in practice. But that doesn't work. In my mind, it doesn't work in the spiritual life. It's not like I go practice prayer and then I go do prayer. So to me, I love the word walk. When Jesus says, follow me, he says, walk. It literally translated just means walk behind me or walk with me. Paul in Ephesians 4:1, right? He says, walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. So I prefer walks. How are we walking with the Lord? And what does that look like in our lives? And so I'm wrestling through what are the kind of 10, I think there's about 10 or 12 walks in the Christian life that all relate to being in communion with God, committed to his people, committed to the cause of Christ. But I think there's 10 walks, and it includes, so one of them I'm navigating right now. So I haven't done this. So don't say, how's it going? I haven't done this. I think there's something really powerful about pilgrimage, about physically walking in various pilgrimages. So I think I'm convinced there's 3 pilgrimages that I need to do. one of them, and people in our church need to do, one of them is one of the most basic, the pilgrimage of your own ethnicity, like your people. Where are your people from? Go walk the land, go touch the soil. I love what Scazzaro says, right? He says, Jesus might be in your heart, but grandpa's in your bones.
Yeah.
And I joke about this. My kids are so stubborn. Like, where do they get this from? Like, they're so stubborn. And then I realized, well, I'm not just Indian, I'm Tamil Indian. And of all the states in India, only one state is called the land of. And so I'm from Tamil Nadu, the land of the Tamils. Because even the Brits, the colonials are like, these guys are they just don't listen. Like these are the land of the Tamils. And then my wife comes from an Irish background. So you have like the two most stubborn people groups start to breed children. And you're like, well, part of their stubbornness might be, but it's in their bones. It's in their DNA. And so I had this moment where I'm telling my son, I need to take you back to India. You feel the soil on the ground. You need to know where you come from. And then he goes, well, what about mom's side? I'm like, well, mom was born in Texas, so I guess we could go to Texas. Well, this got me thinking, well, my wife also has an ethnic identity, a migrant story. And so I think we need a pilgrimage into what's in my bones, the story of my family. And that pilgrimage can include ancestry and who are we and like being on the soil. I think the second pilgrimage is faith pilgrimage. And I think that can take a couple different routes. What's the story of the way the faith was ingrained in my family? A friend of mine was in China a few weeks ago, and she posted a picture where her grandmother got converted and the church she got baptized in. I'm like, what an incredible moment to go to the place where faith started in your family and go sit at that place and experience the power of that place, the sacredness of that place. So I think there's a faith story, which for you guys is beautiful here because this is like a legacy right here. So how do you invite people to like navigate the faith of their family and the spiritual heritage that's been passed on from great grandparents to grandparents? And so I think there's a faith, but there's also, I think, an extended faith pilgrimage of going to Israel and walking. I've never done that yet, but doing that, going to where St. Thomas went to in southern India, going to that place, walking the El Camino, walking these things that have spiritual storylines inside of who we are as a people. I think the pilgrimage is another one. And then the third pilgrimage, I think, is church pilgrimage. So one thing we do when people join our church is we invite them to a 21-day pilgrimage challenge where they go to the first place the church started. They have a prayer there for them, something to journal. They go to the high school, something to pray, something to journal, and then they come to the church. And so like go where the church has gone and be reminded that people way before you, and for us, it's 9 years. For you guys, it's way longer, where people have faithfully like led the way and paid sacrifices to so the church could be what it is. And so I'm on to pilgrimage right now. So but my daily life is pretty rhythmic. I'm a left brain, right brain person. And so Monday, Tuesday is all right brain function. So all my meetings, all my admin, any planning only happens on Monday, Tuesday. And then left brain is Wednesday, Thursday. So all the creative, all the writing, all the songwriting, all the sermon writing is on. So I'm pretty methodical about that. If someone says, hey, can I have a quick meeting about budget? That's Monday, Tuesday. I'm very left brain, right brain. I've just found for me that increases my capacity.
Right.
When
you're not having to jump back and forth in the same day.
Very few people can go back and forth at a high level for a long time. And I thought I could. We probably have the personality to do it for a short term. And then we just don't become good at any one of those things. So I'm a left brain, right brain. And then other than that, my day is I'm up at 4. I spend time with, I got a book years ago because my prayer life was pathetic, like pathetic. Because I can read all day, I can memorize all day, but prayer, my mind is moving. So I'd be, dear Lord, thank you for, I wonder if the Bulls won last night. Oh, I come back to like, Lord, and pray for, did we order that? Did I pay it? So I would go just so blah, blah, blah. So I got this book years ago, probably 15 years ago, and it was called 30 Days with John Wesley. And it's literally 30 days of morning prayer and evening prayer. It's essentially just morning prayer, spending time with the Lord, reading a verse, meditating on it. And the evening is just honestly Wesley's version of the Examen. That's all it is. And so I do that in the morning, and that's taken my prayer life to be more robust, more focused. And so I spend the first hour in prayer with the Lord, silence. And then I read the Bible, meditate, do a very simple sort of Lectio Divina for myself. and then I sit in silence. I try to do anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes of silence, of just sitting. So no writing, no journaling, no music, nothing, silence, which it takes a while to get to. I mean, 15, like, oh, that's not bad. That's hard. I remember the first time I was like, I'm gonna go a minute. I'm like, it's only been 8 seconds.
Yeah.
So it's sitting in silence, and then I typically read a book.
Yeah.
And my goal is I usually get to about 2 books a week. And so I read a book. And even my reading though, like when I'm at work, at the office, I only read business, leadership books on Monday, Tuesday. And then Wednesday, Thursday is the more formational things like that. But the morning is typically some kind of a formational book. So read that in the morning. And that's pretty much every day, Monday through Saturday. Sunday mornings, I'm up again at 4, and it's prayer and then just prepping for preaching. But I'm very methodical about the day. What I started a couple of years ago is what I just call transition liturgy. And so whenever I'm transitioning from one thing to another, so getting out of my car in the morning, before I walk in the building, I do a transition prayer. And these are the things I write down. So I'm just reciting the same prayer.
Yeah.
I got my brother gave me Valley of Vision for my birthday several years ago. And so every morning I'm reading a prayer from Valley of Vision, pray that over my kids. And so just kind of the same rhythm of creating liturgy, daily, ordinary liturgy throughout the day. So the transition liturgy has been really helpful for me, because coming back home after work, who knows what the day has been like. I'm going to walk into a house that's crazy. And so being able to spend about 7 minutes outside praying, I might go for a walk, and then walking has been a practice for me. I try to do a 15-minute walk every day, clear my mind, just spend time with the Lord, just go walk around our church building or just walk down the street and back. So that's been really good. So those kind of the rhythms I do in terms of, but for me, it's learning that these are walks. How do I walk out hospitality, walk prayer, walk out service, worship, giving. So all those. So a daily practice for my wife and I since day one of our marriage has been tithing. And that is something we just will not. We can be flat, and we have been flat broke. And we just learned early on that if we don't trust the Lord with our money, then we can't trust him with anything else. Our children, our house, our ministry, our calling, our bodies, anything. And so that is for me, that's a spiritual walk of walking with Jesus. It's not just a practice, it's walking with Jesus. And so for me, as you could probably tell in our conversation, I'm a very big language person. What does that word mean? How are we using it? And so for me, I see the word walk throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. And so I want to create I want to have a life where I'm walking with God and moving with God, and then use that same language with my children and then our church. Like, hey, we are walking with God. We're not just practicing something. But again, Willard defines that so differently, and I think he would define it as walking. I just like the word walk better.
Right.
So that's the way I would say it.
So what does your message preparation kind of process look like? I think Jacob may appreciate me asking this question.
Okay. I'll go rapid, because I don't know how much time we have. I'll go rapid. So I approach preaching like cooking. So I love cooking shows, and not I love chef shows. Watching the world. I mean, Michelin star guys, precision, the way they I have to be very careful what I get into, because when I get into, I'm 100%er. So I got into cooking over COVID, and I got Japanese blades, and I'm saving money. My kids aren't going to the dentist for the next several years. We're getting cooking stuff. Okay, that's what we're doing. So I love cooking shows. And when you realize cooking, you see there's so much precision in what they do. There's thoughtfulness about how they prepare. But then there's the fundamentals. Like, what is this guy's approach to cooking? So David Hume is one of the best cooks, right? One of the best chefs in the world. I think he's Michelin 3-star. And he says he has 4 fundamentals behind his approach to cooking. So I thought, okay, what are my 4 fundamentals? Every sermon, every talk I do has to have these 4 fundamentals. So I would say, 1, it has to be prophetic. It has to be a prophetic voice that's coming from the scriptures, driven by the scriptures. What is God aiming to say from this text to these people? So it's prophetic. Second, it has to be creative. And by creative, I just mean think through the way you're going to tell stories or illustrations, or move it in a way that, I'm not saying you have to be creative and get some crazy illustration every single time. Yeah. Be creative by the means by which God has created you to be creative. The third thing is, it has to be human. Meaning, are you moving people through through emotions. Are they laughing and then are they crying? You talk about grief and talk about joy. So you're moving to what it means to be human. And then the third thing or the fourth thing is it has to be precise. Every transition, where you're moving, how you're saying something, time, blocking, all that has to be precise. So that's how I would say is the fundamentals. I approach every sermon as a story. This is a story. It's a narrative weave. You're weaving 4 stories together at the same time. You're weaving the story of the text itself. What is this text saying? Who is he writing to? What are they experiencing? What's the place and time? So that's one story. The second story is how does it fit into the entire meta-narrative of the scriptures? The Bible's telling one story.
Right.
So how is this story telling that story? And then third is what is the human story it's telling? What is the human experience that we can all begin to understand? And then the fourth is their story, my story, the personal. So I'm weaving it, but everything's about storytelling. Because, I mean, that's why I don't necessarily ever do, and here's 4 practical takeaways.
Right.
Think of the best movies you've watched.
Right.
Or the best books you've read in like stories. How many of those had, and now here's 4 practical takeaways. If you watch Braveheart and at the very end, it's like, here's 4 practical takeaways. Right. Defeat the English. Like it doesn't say that anywhere. Because there's something that's inspiring about it. We are a storytelling people.
Yeah.
And I think preaching in America has become so linear, so cause and effect, so point 1 to point 2, rather than tell the story, invite people into the story. So that I look at everything as story, tell a story, move in stories, move from being a storyteller or telling stories to a storyteller. The whole sermon should be a story, moving front to back, moving through people. So I view it that way. And then the final thing I do, and then I'll walk you through the actual breakdown, is before I write any sermon, and I challenge every preacher, what are you trying to do? Not just with this sermon, but when you preach, what are you trying to do? And write that out. So for me, at the top of all my notes, I have one sentence. It just says, awaken their imagination for life with God. That's all I'm trying to do. Just spark their imagination for what would it look like if I invited God into my marriage, into my parenting, into my addiction, into my vocation, whatever it is. So I'm trying to do that. The breakdown of my preaching is really, really simple. I start with the text and I say, what's the premise? What's happening here? What's the context? What's the premise? Who are the people? Who are the characters? The second thing I ask is, what's the problem? What's the problem here? And sometimes it's very obvious. In a parable, in a narrative, it's very obvious. At other times, an epistle, it's a little bit more difficult, but the problem is always there.
Yeah.
What is the human problem here? Then I look at what's the prompt, meaning what's the thing where the hero goes, I'm going to go fight the dragon. I can go do this. We should go do this. Like, what is the prompt? And then I end with what's the promise? What is the promise of God behind all of this? And so I literally, if you look at my notes, it'll say, not in my final notes, but in my study, in my prep, it'll say premise, problem, prompt, promise. And you'll go through those 4. Now, if you're a good storyteller, you won't just say, all right, everybody, here's the premise.
Right.
Blah, 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 blah. Right. If you're a good storyteller, you'll weave the premise in and out. Think about the best shows you watch and how, like, whoa, we just found out a ton about this character in episode 7 that we had no idea about episode 1, because good storytellers are constantly weaving premise through it.
Right.
So, like, why do grown men still dress up like Darth Vader? Because George Lucas is a phenomenal storyteller. Yeah. And as you watch Star Wars or Dune, so much of the premise is unraveling. The promise is unraveling. The prompt is moving. And so you're constantly trying. Yeah. And now that you know that, okay, so here's a challenge. Premise, problem, prompt, promise. Watch any Disney movie, and they are methodical about how they move through that. Yeah. Any single one. The Lion King is probably the easiest to go through, like the prompt where he finally realizes, like I'm the king. Yeah. Like, this is what I am. I need to go. I need to go and fight. And then he goes to fight Scar. Yeah. And then the promise is at the very, very, like, the moment where he sees his father in him. And then he goes and, then he holds his kid up at Pride Rock or whatever it's called. So Disney's magical at this. And preaching, I think, in America has just gotten so mechanical, so kind of step 1, step 2, step 3, cause and effect. And I think human beings are longing for a story. And we have to invite them into the story of God. Yeah. So that's my really quick how I approach
That's awesome.
preaching.
That's awesome.
Beautiful.
Jacob, final thoughts and questions before we wrap things up?
No, that's fantastic. That's
Your
perfect.
penmanship is,
Yeah.
award winning.
I mean,
Thanks.
I wish we could, maybe we'll find a way to show this on camera at some point. But yeah, his handwriting is a font.
I'll hit the,
My
show
gosh. I thought my handwriting was good. I feel insecure now.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
I've never thought my handwriting is good because so Hannah is my little sister, and she's got a font, and
Yeah.
then she married somebody
With a font.
who has a font. They have a font.
Isn't
Yeah.
there a
It's
sheriff
a font
font?
family. Yeah,
there should be.
should be.
Maybe it's serif. I don't know.
Yep.
Sure. I will just say that first off, anybody that's like in ministry will have immensely benefited from this, but every single one of these things are applicable at a familial level. Even the idea of like sermon prep. Okay, great. Yeah, we get the chance to present scripture, the gospel, to a group of people. But as a parent,
Yeah.
I'm constantly having to, it might not be preaching a singular sermon, but I've got like just that idea is about inviting our children into the grand story. So we're in a sense preaching to them, developing culture of hospitality. That's not a like, hey, if you're a pastor, here's how to do it. It's like as a parent, as a business owner, like this is how you enact the gospel at business through hospitality. And it might not look like the way we want to construct, community table groups, but there's ways to do that at business. So I just want to say that like all these things are translatable to not
absolutely.
just pastors.
Yeah. And one thing my wife and I are now recognizing is that our children are around our hospitality and they see people over, but we need to help them be hospitable. And so we're asking, hey, what are your friends that you want to come over and hang out? And then I think seeing just everything you own as an investment. Yeah. And so we just got this really cool pizza maker by Uni. Maybe they'll sponsor this episode. But again, before I buy anything, I will research it to death.
Same way.
And I need to go find a store. I need to touch it. I need to feel it. And so we got this Uni pizza maker. And it's, if I'm buying something, it's got to be if I'm into it. That's why my car is about to die any second now, but I don't care because I can't cook in my car. But I got this pizza maker. And so people come over and we make pizzas and you can see this sort of communal, beautiful thing happening. And then my wife and I are like, our kids could do this. We could have them just like, what friends do you want to have over from school, from church, whatever? And we'll just help you host it. But this is your thing. Yeah. So teaching our kids how to be hospitable, I think is a lost art. And so we want to help our kids learn how to do that as well. Like how do they help give? And our kids are with us when we're tithing. So they can see where our money is going. And so also hospitality or prayer or service. So inviting our kids into that as well.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, I wish we had more time. It is time to kind of wrap this up. Nirup, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. It's been so good to be here. My son, I think he's moving here. He's like, Durant is the best town he's ever been to.
That's awesome.
I think he's been the mayor of your town. He loves it.
I'm sure you do a great job. So before we close things down here, how can people learn more about you, your ministry? What resources maybe do you want to share and point people to?
Yeah, all of our sermons are on YouTube. So search LifeGate Denver on YouTube, and then you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, all LifeGate Denver, and then my personal is just Nirup Alphonse.
Awesome.
You don't go to my YouTube; it's just my son making videos.
Well, we'll be sure to include links in the description of this episode to all of those things. And thanks again for joining us. If this is, we're wrapping things up. If this is your chance to let us know what you think. Please leave a comment. What stuck out to you? What are your takeaways from this episode? We would love to see that in the comments. Please take a minute to like and subscribe and share this with somebody that you know would benefit from it. And thank you for watching, and we will see you on the next one.